if there's anything above the banking interests, it would be an occult group or an affinity of some kind, where there are motives that most of us can't even imagine. There are incentives, there are goals and qualities that are very important to people in various occults. And I'm talking about some very ugly occults, like Satanist occults and people that actually participate in human sacrifices. I used to think that was a ridiculous idea, that we don't have that anymore. But now I've discovered that, no, we do have that. As incredible as it is, and there's more of it than I thought when I discovered that it was real.
Welcome to Discourse with Christian. I'm your host, Christian White, and today's guest is G. Edward Griffin, a renowned writer and documentary film producer who is best known for his 1994 book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. Ed, it's an honor to have you on today and to meet you virtually.
Well, thank you, Christian. It's my pleasure to be here. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, as I always say, it sounds cliche, but there's so much to cover within the time that we have today, so to speak. Would love to hear your current macro take on things, whether that's where you see society headed, the markets, geopolitics, wherever you'd like to start us, Ed.
Well, I guess that's a good opening. It's a pretty wide open door. What's on my mind today? Well, everything is going to pieces, I'm afraid to say. I'm not really a pessimist. I like to think of myself as a realist, and a realistic view of our world is not very pleasant. That doesn't mean that there's nothing can be done about it, but it means that we better be very careful that we're correct in our analysis and that we pay full attention and not let any time slip away, because if my hunch is correct, our time for doing anything about it substantially is getting very tight, very short. And by that, I mean that to get an understanding of what's going on in my mind, we have to climb up to about 35 or 40,000 foot elevation and look down on the earth from pretty high up. So we see the really big picture of what's going on on our planet. And the first thing that I think we would notice is that this thing that we talk about maybe happening someday, that we call global governance or global government or one world government and so forth, they say they're working on that and that's what they want to bring. We better be careful and so forth. First thing I notice at that elevation is that it's already here. And it's been here for quite a while. We just didn't recognize it because we still have these words attached to certain regions, like United States of America and UK and China and Japan and Germany. Those names are still on the map. But when you look underneath those names, you realize that almost all anyway, all of the major names, the biggest countries in the world, and most of the smaller ones too, are moving in lockstep with each other on almost everything you can think of. And perhaps the most recent dramatic example would be this thing we call COVID, which is a whole topic in itself. But all of a sudden we woke up one morning and here we had a pandemic, and everybody was going to die if we didn't do something about it right away and stop worrying about everything else and concentrating on how we protect ourselves and our family and our fellow countrymen from this deadly pandemic that's spreading around the world. And overnight this happened. And of course, I'm no expert on biology or epidemiology and all that sort of thing, but I know that pandemics don't spread around the world like overnight. They have to be transmitted, according to official definition, transmitted from person to person. Of course, they can cover great distances, but it takes time. But no, not this time. It didn't. It was all around the world at the same week, and the announcements that came on over the radio and the television sets that people were viewing in all of these nations were precisely the same with each other. Even the exact wording was the same. The solutions were all the same. We've got to wear masks. We've got to lock people down. We've got to prevent the spread. We've got to develop a vaccine and force everybody to take it. It just happened around the world all at once. So there was a dead giveaway that we already have a network. Well, I don't care whether you call it world government or the new world order or anything like that, but it's here. And we didn't recognize it until we had some event that would call into action all of the players who are connected with that mechanism or that network, and they just showed up like mushrooms in the grass after a good night's rain. You look when you went to bed, there are no mushrooms, but you wake up in the morning and look out your window, and there are tens of thousands of mushrooms in your lawn. Where did they come from? Well, they came from the spores that were always in the soil before the rain. Anyway, they were there. We just didn't see them until the signal went out that it's time to show yourself. And I'm making this analogy up on the spot. I'm sure there are better analogies, but that came to mind. I think that the thing that's on my mind most of all today is the fact that the people of the world are being denied access to accurate information as to what's really going on. And there's a lot of confusion because we're expected to listen to our news and read our newspapers and hear the conversations and the debates. And usually there are a couple of political parties which appear to be opposite to each other, and they're debating this and debating that. And we listen to all this, and we're supposed to think that it's a crazy world. There's no sense to it all. But in reality, it makes a lot of sense because I guess, fortunately or unfortunately, depending how you look at it, in my case, I think it's fortunate that I've had the occasion and the time and the inclination to do a lot of research on these things. And I've been on the battle line, you might say, for 65 years. I'm now 93 years old, and I became aware of these things the first time way back in 1960. And I've sort of been on the ramparts, on the battlefield in a way, the psychological battlefield anyway, ever since 1960. And I've seen how this has evolved. And I've had a chance, fortunately, to dig down and trace the available evidence right to the core. And I found out, and the reason I'm saying this is I've had a chance to read the books and the reports and listen to the summaries and debates of the people who are in charge of the world today. They go away, most of them belong to organizations, by the way. And that's where you find out a lot about them, is to see what organizations they are affiliated with and what those organizations stand for, according to their own words, and what those organizations have been doing. So if you do that, you find out that almost in every case, what these people are saying to the public about what's going on in the world and what they're doing about it to help us, of course, always to protect us. It's for our own good that they're taking away our liberties. It's for our own good that they forced us all to stay in our homes and wear masks. It's for our own good that we pay a lot of taxes. It's for our own good that we have these terrible wars around the world and we're interfering with other nations and so forth, because it's for our own good. It's for our own good that we get these vaccines and we take them whether we want them or not. It's for our own good for this, our own good for that. And then I read the statements of these people in the books they have written when they're talking to each other or to their inner circle, and they're not interested in our own good at all. They're interested in controlling us and bringing us under this one global matrix of control that they and their forefathers have been dreaming about for decades, if not longer. So now I'm taking too long to answer a simple question of what's on my mind. The number one thing is the fact that I think this global governance, that they like that word governance now, but it's government, is in place. And it's been in place for a long time. Actually, it was already in place before I was born, I discovered. And I was born in 1931. But I go back and look at the origins of this. It goes back to World War I, World War II, and even before, when the parents and the grandparents of these people were writing about some of their books and their memoirs. So it's not new, and it's just evolving exactly the way they have planned to make it. And their latest and perhaps final weapon added to their arsenal for this development is the elimination of cash. The ultimate destruction of a true money system, which is owned by the people. No matter how tyrannical a system may be, if people have money that they can put in their pockets, or if they can put it in a coffee can and bury it in the backyard or in the mattress, and they can pay for something directly from one person to the other, they can still pretty much survive the absolute tyranny of the system in which they live, because they've got the money to buy the services of other people, and they can usually maneuver. But now that's the reason these people, who generally are very closely associated with or under the control of the international banking fraternity, which is the core of this globalist system. The international banking group has been trying to get rid of cash for decades and writing about it and how essential it is. And the reason for that is because if there is no cash, you are no longer independent, no matter what. You can say, oh, yeah, but I'm rich. No, you're not rich, because where's your money? Well, I've got my money. It's in the bank, right? No, you don't. It's in the bank, but now it's the bank's money. And if they don't like what you're doing, all of a sudden you can look at your account on your computer and say, look, I've got $8 million. I can do what I want to. And you go have lunch, you come back and turn on your set and say, whoops, what happened? $0? What do you mean zero? I've got 8 million. No, you don't. It's turned off, and you don't have it in a coffee can, and you don't have it in your mattress. It's all in an account. It's electronic. It's invisible. It's digital. Oh, isn't that wonderful? Digital currency. Hurrah, hurrah. They've trained us to be excited about bringing digital currency into being. It's the most awful thing you can think of, because it's not ours anymore. We don't control it. But we're told it's for our own good, as usual, and we should be very happy to have it. They tell us it's a way of being independent and not having these bad bankers in control. Whoa, they don't know what they're talking about, because it's the bankers that are producing the digital currency now, and that's what they're working toward. They're central bank digital currencies and all kinds of variations. The point is that what we're working toward, and you can see it at 40,000 foot elevation so clearly, is the globalization of every nation, every state, every village, every household, every human being under the control of one huge mechanism that is the most horrible thing you can possibly imagine. It's tyranny, the ultimate form of tyranny. So that's what I see when I look at the world as a whole. Now, from that perspective, you could say, well, where do you go from there? Well, you can jump in your parachute and come down and land wherever you want to and start looking at the small details. But if you really want to know what's going on, in my view, I think you've got to start with the big picture and then start looking at the little pieces of it, so that you don't get lost in the maze of sometimes quite meaningless information that's there just to decoy you away from observing the reality. So I took a long time to answer a simple question, but anyway, that gives us a start, and you can pick any part you want from there, and we'll take our parachute jump and see where we go.
You mentioned about bankers, and for those who are more or less in the space, we're very much aware of the international bankers, if you will, throughout history and such. Where would you say they fit in this pyramid of power? And as it relates to just the hierarchy of things, could you break down that who's at the apex in that pyramid?
Well, it's hard to identify names. There are certain names that are easy, of course. The largest banking uh, dynasties in the world are the Rothschild and the Rockefellers. And you put those two on the list. There are others, but that is well over 70% of the total, probably right there. Who are they after that? Well, it's primarily, at least in my view, and I'm not an expert on this part of it, by the way, so I reserve the right to be wrong. But I think there has been, up until very recently, a strong family or bloodline dynastic element to these people. They're and they still are, very concerned for some strange reason. I don't think it's strange, but some strange reason to most people. They're concerned that the bloodline must be preserved. Well, who cares who you're? I mean, you might want to know who your great-great-grandfather was and so forth, what he did, but you got better be prepared if you want to really find out. Be prepared to find out that he was a horse thief, or and be careful who your ancestors are. But it makes no difference, I don't think, to most of us who they were, although we'd like to know and be proud of them and say we're a member of the Bilderberger dynasty or something. But for most people, what we care about is the quality of each individual in the family or outside of the family. And sometimes our outside of family acquaintances are more close to us and more valuable to us even than those inside the family. And so most people don't really care about a bloodline. They care about an integrity line, a quality line, and so forth. But nevertheless, these people that we're talking about are concerned, very deadly concerned, about bloodlines. So that's a clue to something. I don't know what it is, but that's another topic and maybe another time, and certainly another person who's more interested in more informed about that. And but I think that eventually you get to the point that you suspect that there's something even above that. I don't know what it would be, but I've always been suspicious that this thing we call the occult is probably, if there's anything above the banking interests, it would be an occult group or an affinity of some kind, where there are motives that most of us can't even imagine. There are incentives, there are goals and qualities that are very important to people in various occults. And I'm talking about some very ugly occults, like Satanist occults and people that actually participate in human sacrifices. I used to think that was a ridiculous idea, that we don't have that anymore. But now I've discovered that, no, we do have that. As incredible as it is, and there's more of it than I thought when I discovered that it was real. So there's something there. I don't know what it is, but if there's anything that you could describe, it would probably be of an occult nature. So having said that, I think most of the organizations of these people circulate around the international banking group, mainly because that's where the money comes from. The system has been carefully engineered over the past couple of 100 years so that money no longer is based on something of intrinsic value like gold or silver, which takes human effort to produce, and therefore keeps money in balance with everything else that requires human effort to produce. So when you have that kind of money that requires to be dug out of the earth and refined and put into coins and bars and so forth, you've got human effort balancing human effort. And so that's when you have stability of purchasing power. If people are free to move away from making yachts or making bowls for dinner or something, and they can go mine gold if there's more money over there. So people are free to move back and forth, and this natural force of supply and demand that we hear about actually works. So the balances for yachts, the price for yachts and bowls sort of remains in balance with the price of everything else, because people can move if they find it's better someplace else. More people move and start producing those things, and the supply increases, whereas the demand remains constant, and the prices come back into balance again. So the natural forces of supply and demand are pretty effective to have a good monetary system. But if the money is not produced by something that requires human nature to create, all it takes is a group of people raising their hands, say, I vote for it. Yeah, how many billion was that? Oh, never mind, I vote for it. Whatever it costs, I vote for it. And they create the $1 billion, and then they loan it into existence. And if you can create money that way, you can control the world, because money is the vehicle by which you can command the services of other people. And if you have unlimited ability to create unlimited quantities of money, you have unlimited ability to retain the services of an unlimited number of people to do an unlimited number of awful things. You can hire armies, you can hire assassins, you can hire college professors, you can hire medical researchers, you can hire philosophers, you can hire politicians. If you got the money, you can control the world. So that would be the tier that is obvious when you start looking what is behind all of this and who are they. Anybody connected with the banking cartels, and by that you correctly identified a moment ago, as I recall, you said the central banks. Those are the money cartels around the world, different nations, that are basically occupied and run by private banks in the technical sense of the word. They're not government entities, although they go to great extent to make themselves look like they're government, because that creates the illusion that if you have a government that involves the participation of voters, like in the democratic concept, everybody gets the illusion that, well, look, I vote, therefore I select my politicians, I select my own dictators, my own presidents, and so forth. So if you can select your own dictators, that means that you control them, doesn't it? Well, that's the illusion, of course. It's a great game, and most people fall for it. But it's not true, obviously. If you have a system that has no limitations on what those people can do, those people that you voted for, if it's a winner take all, which it is in our system today, it's the ultimate democracy according to definitions. If you get 51% of the vote, you win. And if you win, well, then you can do whatever you want to do. And that's the theory, the government theory that exists around the world today. It wasn't always that way in America. In America, we were given a very sort of a simple form of a republic, and they called it a republic. It was based on the principles that even though you did vote for your representatives, you had representatives that you voted for to run your government, which has the power of the gun. You gave power to these people to use a gun even on yourself, but they didn't ask, well, wait a minute, you can't use it for anything, just certain things. Nobody asked that question. All they asked is, did you win the election? Well, we know where that goes on today. The Republicans, the Democrats, or the Whigs, or whoever, whatever the political party is called, they call them some conservative or liberal or communist or socialist, or who knows. The names don't make any difference. What matters is the concepts, the principles of how they operate. And they all of them today, everywhere in the world, operate on the principle that winner takes all. So in fact, I was writing a little revision the other day for a booklet I'm putting out just called The Chasm, the conflict between individualism and collectivism. And I was thinking about this very thing. So I created a little poster that goes up. If I had it, I'd show it to you, but it's simple. And the first line says, it says collectivism, and then quote marks. Congratulations, you won the election. Now let's get busy. Who do you want to benefit? Who do you want to plunder? And who do you want to kill? That's collectivism. And the next one says individualism, and it starts off with, congratulations, you won the election. Now let's get going. How do you intend to protect the rest of us, protect our lives and our liberty? So it's the whole concept of what is the purpose of the state. Not that you just take for granted that the state can do anything it wants to do. You have to think of what's the purpose of a state? Why do we even want one? And of course, the answer is we want a state to protect us when we can't protect ourselves against an invading army or some crook or some madman killer or something like that. And we don't want to have somebody on our roof all night long with an automatic machine gun to guard our house. We want to be able to delegate our own right to protect ourselves. We delegate it to the state. And that's the only purpose that the state has, really, and when you think about it. But you look at the state today, it does whatever it wants to do. It wants to tell us how to think, wants to tell us where to live, wants to tell us how much we pay each other for labor that we retain, wants to tell us what we have to take in our blood for our own good. It tells us everything. It's who do you want to benefit? Who do you want to plunder? And who do you want to kill? Let's go find some country we can go invade, But it's all for your own good, you understand. So this is where, when you ask the question, what's going on in the world, I just described to you, in my view at least, is the main problem is that we have been in a war for a long time. It's the final world war, and we've been in it certainly including World War II, but it never ended. It just gradually morphed into a different type of warfare. World War II was probably, I think more than probably, obviously, it was the last time that nations will come to war against each other, where you can identify your enemy because he's got a uniform that looks different from yours, and he speaks a language that's different from yours, and he comes from a country that's not yours. That was the old style. Ever since the end of World War II, it has shifted drastically and rapidly to the new form, which is the conquest is from within. There are no uniforms. The battlefield is in the political parties. It's in the church organizations, in the labor unions. It's in the media. It's in the school system. The battle is for the minds and the loyalties and the resolve, the values of every citizen. And it's not, the government is no longer looking at enemies from outside the state, from other countries. The government is now considering the individual citizens to be the enemy. And the main purpose of governments today is to gradually conquer the population that feeds the army. In other words, it's internal. The battle is from inside. It's not national against national. It's international. It's leadership. It's government against the people. And the end result is something we've never seen before in history, which is the New World Order, which is their phrase for it.
Yeah, you've covered several things that I think are fascinating. As I've embarked on my own personal journey, Ed, and to some of the viewers who are not really aware of this and such, you mentioned like the occult stuff. You hear about secret societies. Some of this stuff sounds very loony, but it's very real. And I'm reminded of Mark Twain's. I'm paraphrasing. The truth is stranger than fiction. And whether it's I don't know if you've encountered like Whitney Webb's work. One Nation Under Blackmail, and a lot of these other works out there. It's just fascinating, the nature, the depravity, the insidiousness of agencies and cabals and governments, and how many people will go their whole lives and they're completely clueless. And they're just watching, just mainstream all the way, and they drink all the Kool-Aid, and it's very striking. You've mentioned about how this has been going on for a long time, even before your time. Um, I read a book back, well, not that I was around in the 50s, but it was from the 1950s. I know you've read it. You must have. I think it's called Pawns in the Game. And I just thought that was fascinating to, listen to, or excuse me, read a book from the 50s and speculate on the future of things or potential. We hear a lot of talk about, that we are already in a WW3 and that things are supposed to really tick up from now here in August going into next year. And as it relates to that, I figured I'd ask your current take on that. Um, considering the geopolitical climate that we're currently in today.
Well, did I understand the question is basically, are we in World War III? Is that
Yes,
correct?
yeah,
Well, yeah,
yeah.
that's actually my main theme up until now. This war has been going on even before World War One, but we still had to go through the uh, the charade of physical war, one nation against another, and a lot of that was engineered. It was certainly not necessary in my view, and then once we got into the wars, we prolonged them. This was an amazing thing I discovered when I did an interview with the chap that I'm trying to think of his name now. I'm drawing a blank. That's the problem of getting to be old like myself. Anyway, get to the choice, to the point, which is that um, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace um, was a very large, and still is a very large, nonprofit organization. And the chap I'm talking about was assigned to the Reese Committee to investigate nonprofit organizations at the follow at the end of World War II. And I thought that was strange when I first heard about it. Why would you investigate a nonprofit organization? And I did a little research, and I found out that during and toward the end of World War II, some of the largest nonprofit organizations, the Ford Foundation particularly, and the Rockefeller Group, as they had several of them, and the Carnegie Endowment Fund for International Peace, were promoting literature that was out and out communist literature. They were circulating pamphlets written by Joseph Stalin, for example. And Stalin was talking about the elimination of capitalism and free enterprise and all that thing, and the rise of the people against the capitalists, the great exploiters, and so on. These nonprofit organizations were printing this stuff and circulating it. So a lot of people were very upset by that. And there was a lot of pressure on Congress to investigate these organizations. So this was the guy who was selected to be the chief investigator for the Reese Committee, which it was Congressman Reese who was taking the lead in that investigation. And I guess where I'm going with that is that the first investigation, this fellow went to the offices of the president of the Carnegie Endowment Fund, and actually I'm taking a little time with this because I want to get it right. I think your viewers would be very interested in this fact, and it's got to be right. So I'm taking a moment with it. As I recall, this fellow got a phone call that came through his office or a letter, and it said, "We understand you are interested in what we're doing here, so I invite you to come visit me in my office in New York." And Norman Dodd was his name. I knew I would come up with it, Norman Dodd. And so Dodd was amazed that he had to go and interview this fellow and find out what they're up to. And instead, the president of the Carnegie Fund calls him instead and says, "Would you like to come visit me?" And so, yes, he did. So he went, and according to Norman Dodd, and I interviewed him on video, by the way, and so I know I have the documentation in his own words, sitting in a chair right in front of me, saying the things that I am about to tell you. And so Norman Dodd described it this way, in paraphrase. He said, "When I arrived at Mr. Gaither's office," and that was the guy who was the president of the Carnegie Fund, he said, he spoke to me, he said, "Mr. Dodd," he said, "you're probably wondering why I invited you to my office." And Dodd said, "I was surprised." He said, "Of course, well, Mr. Gaither, yes, I'm very surprised why you invited me, because I was thinking I had to come and invite myself, and I wanted to come." But Dodd, Gaither just continued. He said, "Well, let me answer the question of why we invited you." He took the initiative, in other words. And he said, "We understand that you are interested in finding out what we do here." And Dodd said, "Yes, that's exactly why I'm here." And so Gaither said, he launched right into it. He said, "We here have been under informal direction of the White House for quite a while, all during the war and before. And the substance of that directive was so to change life in the United States so it can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union." And Dodd said he almost fell off of his chair when he heard that coming from the president of the Carnegie Endowment Fund. And Dodd said, well, if that was what you're doing, Mr. Gaither, why don't you tell the American people that? And Gaither said, "We would never consider doing such a thing." And this is what I'm telling you. When you find out from the words of the people themselves what's going on, you begin to get a little more skeptical about what you read in the newspaper. And so anyway, the story goes on, and Mr. Gaither said that that their primary effort as the end of World War II approached, their primary effort was to make sure that the war did not end very quickly. They wanted to prolong the war. And the question came, why would you want to prolong a war when your enemy was already offering peace offers, already saying, we would like to surrender if you can give us some advantages and so forth. And the answer was, well, because in times of war, the population is only concerned about winning the war, and they're focused on the horrors of losing the war and losing everything to a cruel, conquering enemy. And under those conditions of wartime, the people are not interested in preserving their liberties, and they are willing to make changes in their culture, their legal system, their religious, their political system, their everything, their monetary system, in order to avoid, or rather to end the war. So we want to keep the war going, to keep that mentality of fear in the American people so that we can change the way they live, so eventually they will be able to be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union. Now, there in a little nutshell is the secret to what's going on in the world. And it's being done not by the Russians or Chinese, it's being done by people who are American citizens, some of the wealthiest ones in the world, as a matter of fact. It's coming from Wall Street. It's coming from New York. It's coming from the educational system. It's coming from the monetary system. And it's coming from people who say that they are Americans. And they are destined, determined to destroy America as such, so it can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union. Now, it's not just the Soviet Union. The reason, as I interpret it anyway, the reason that Gaither mentioned the Soviet Union, and perhaps the reason that Franklin Delano Roosevelt mentioned the Soviet Union to be merged, is because they were about as opposite as you could think of from the American way. Their goal was not just to unite with Russia or with the Soviets. Their goal was to blend all countries of the world into one global government based on the model of collectivism. And if you could get the United States and the Soviet Union to be merged, you could merge all of the rest easily. So that's really what was the intent of that phrase about the Soviet Union. Once you understand the background and the long-range strategies that have been going on, even as far back as World War I and II for sure, you realize more readily and more clearly what is happening today. What we are seeing today primarily is a mop-up operation. The hard grunt work has already been done.
Pretty spooky. Given what you have shared, and perhaps other things going on around the world, what are some other things that you feel are not receiving enough attention these days?
Well, yes, there's one other huge item that I consider to be equal to what I just said a moment ago. And that is the fact, how do I say this? I'm probably going to get everybody mad at me. Well, I've done that before. But as I see it, we are living in a period now of, well, as I already said, psychological warfare. Okay. Nobody has a problem with that. It's psychological warfare. You can see that. But one of the most important elements of that psychological warfare is something what you would call controlled opposition. It's the tactic of providing your own opposition just to make sure you control both sides of a conflict. It's the same mentality behind being in the wrestling business and being the manager for two different wrestlers, and you put them both in the ring against each other. They're both your guy. You don't care really which one wins, but you can benefit if you know who's going to win, because there's a lot of money to be made by making good bets. So even though the two wrestlers will go into the match, into the arena, and they'll beat the heck out of each other, maybe throw themselves out of the ring, hit the chairs. They could badly bruise themselves, and sometimes injuries can be made that are serious. But nevertheless, it's a phony fight. And you have to put on a good fight, because otherwise nobody will pay the money to come in and watch the fight. They've got to see some action. And this, to me, is the analogy to politics today. You've got to see a fight. Otherwise, you don't think you think you're being tricked, which you are. But if you think it's a real fight, well, you don't think you're being tricked. But look, they threw him out of the ring. You don't tell me that's a fixed fight. Yes, I do. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Now, when we look at the world of politics, we see two political parties in almost every country that are somehow defined as opposite to each other, right? In our country, we have the Republicans and the Democrats. And in other countries, they might have the conservatives and the liberals, or the Communist Party, or some Socialist Party, or the People's Party, or the Umbrella Party, or the Agricultural Party. They got the names, it doesn't make any difference. But they fight against each other, and they argue, and they expose each other, and it really looks like a good fight. But if you dig into the background of these people, where they came from, where they went to school, who their teachers were, who they associated with all their lives, what clubs they belonged to, what books they've written, what speeches they've delivered, and listen to what they said and watch what they have done, you say, oh, wait a minute. They don't really believe this stuff that they're saying, or they've had one heck of a change of attitude. But almost always they come from a background which does not support their position of present day opposition to evil, right? And it's not unusual to know that the man or woman you think is representing your point of view, because why do you think so? Well, they say so. They say so. And you think, oh, well, they wouldn't lie, would they? They wouldn't be an actor, would they? Well, in psychological warfare, the answer is yes, they would be. They could be. And in my view, many of them are actors. And they're not there to win. They're not there to represent your point of view. They're there to convince you that you have a champion and you must support him or her as your only chance of beating back the evil that you see creeping around you. And the actors can be very good at it. They say the right things, and they have to do some good things too. Like, you got to throw your opponent out of the ring once in a while. Now you know for sure that you're not acting, you're right? You've got to make it dramatic. You've got to make it real. And you have to do some things that are injurious to the position you are hired to represent. But you are in charge now, and you know who's going to win the game. You know who's going to win the match. And I see that in politics today, and I'm not the only one. I mean, actually, I first discovered this. I got to tell you this. I hope I'm not wasting your time, but back in the 60s, when I was first learning about some of this ideological materialism, they like to call it, I was curious about the communist movement. I couldn't understand why, when you look around you, every country that's been taken over by communism is followed by mass murders, genocide, poverty, economic collapse, misery, pain, suffering, everything. It's just horrible. And yet, in countries that are non-communist, they're still recruiting communists to want to bring communism to their country. Can't they see what actually happens? And of course, I discovered when I got to talking to some of these young, most of them very young, student type, pro-communist types, they say, yeah, but they didn't do it right in Russia. They're not doing it right in China. True communism, as we see it, will be truly glorious. And so they think it's going to be better if they just get different people in charge. So I got curious, and I went down to Los Angeles. That's where my home office was. I was working for a large corporation at the time. I was in the corporate world. And I went downtown to the library to do some research on communism. And in the process, I learned that there was a communist bookstore in downtown Los Angeles. So it's called the People's Bookshop on Larchmont Street. So I went down there, and I show up with my suit and tie, sideburns for the 1960s, and I walked in, and of course they were more casual dressed, to say the least, more like hippies types. And the People's Bookshop, they were very nervous about me. What are you doing here? I said, well, I'm interested in learning about communism. Do you have books here on that? I'd like to know. So I convinced them that I was truly serious about wanting to know about communism, which I was. I really was. They didn't know that why I was interested, but nevertheless. So they showed me this book, and I bought a lot of books. I think all the critical ones, the Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. And then I bought the stuff that Mao Zedong had written, a little red book and so forth, and some essays by others. And then I came across on the bottom shelf of one of those racks was a set of books, leather bound, the collected works of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. And I said, what are those? Oh, those. And they're very important, very good. And I said, well, pack them up. I'll like to buy the set. Well, okay, now, cutting to the chase. I actually read those books, Christian. And the interesting thing to me is after I was done with that, they invited me to some classes, some discussion groups. They were trying to recruit me into the party. I knew that. And so I went along with it. And I found out when I got into conversation with these comrades that I had read the books that they recommended, but they had not. Because I was able to teach them a few things about what Lenin was saying, which made me very popular to them, by the way. And but they really didn't understand. They were what many collectivists are. They were looking for quick answers. They liked slogans. They fell for the slogans. All of them, the mantra of collectivism is from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. What's wrong with that? Isn't that the basis of Christian charity? To give as you can to those who need? And of course, another slogan, we are opposed to racism, war, and exploitation of the poor, and exploitation of and all of their slogans are good. I mean, sign me up. I'm for that. But when you get into Lenin and somewhat Marx, but mostly Lenin, you get a different picture. Now you find out what's behind the mask. Lenin, with all those writings, had basically one theme that kept showing up over and over and over again. And that theme, I'll paraphrase it now in my own words, but he was very clear about it. It was something like this. Comrades, when we go into a nation, a country that we want to take over from the inside, how do we do it? Do we stand up and tell them we are communists and that we want to change their culture, their nationality, their language, their religion, their legal system? Of course not. Why, they would run us out on a rail. They certainly wouldn't like us. So don't be stupid, comrades. Tell them you are an anti-communist. Tell them you love the country's traditions and its language and its history and its legal system and the songs and all of that. And they will like you. Run for office. They will vote for you. And then you get to be their leader. Now, says Lenin, we're getting somewhere. You are now in charge. You decide who gets to use the guns. You can create control over the media. You can determine what they teach in the schools. You now are in charge, you see? And if they object, you don't have to worry any longer about winning a debate. You can shoot them. This is Lenin. And once you read Lenin, all of this mystery clears up. And you can see the Leninist strategy of controlled opposition every day in your daily newspaper if you know what to look for. But you have to know what to look for, and you've got to clear your mind from this illusion that just because somebody's elected to office, that he is a good guy. Some of the best sounding good guys are actors, folks. Our job is to figure out who is real and who is not real. And it's not as hard to figure as you might think. Get past the slogans. Get past the things you want to hear. You know, when somebody holds up the Constitution and says, I stand for the Constitution, you're going to say, well, what's in the Constitution that you do stand for? You have to ask a few questions. And they won't be able to answer it because it's an act. They're not deep on anything, but they're good on the surface. And they'll do some good things. And you say, well, look what he did or she did. Wasn't that wonderful? That's exactly what we needed. Oh, thank God we've got him in office, you know. And it's set up so that you will lose under their leadership bit by bit while struggling and fighting, or you think that they're representing you and they're fighting for you. And when you finally come to the end and we lose, they say, well, we tried, you know. Now, if that doesn't make you mad at me for saying it, it should make you mad at yourself if you didn't see it, because it's the reality. It's the strongest reality in politics today, in my view. So when you ask me what else is on my mind, that is very much on my mind, because until the people of this world wake up to controlled opposition as the principal tactic of our enemy in this war from the inside, we cannot win. We're going to lose. So what's on my mind? To recognize, number one, that we are in a global war, and it's a psychological war. And secondly, we've got to be a little more finicky about who we trust as leaders. We have to know more about them. And we ourselves have to know what we want from them. Unfortunately, a lot of people today don't want much from their leaders except to hear that they're on our side. It's all about who are the good guys and who's the bad guys, you know. Get rid of the bad guys, put the good guys in. Now we'll go back and watch Dancing with the Stars because we got good guys in office, or so we think. We've got to rise above that. And I'll close with something, maybe we're getting to the end here. On a positive note of all this, positive note is that it doesn't take a lot of people to turn the tide. As I read history, it seems to me that everything that was substantial in history was accomplished by 15% of the population who were activists. They were led by 3% of the population who were what we would call the influencers. And they were motivated by 1% of the population who would be the dreamers, the creators, the idea people. We've got the 1%. We've got the 3%. I think we've got the 15%, but they're a little bit confused and they don't know who their friends are. A lot of that 15% that we need, they think they're all alone. They turn on their television set and all they can see is this nonsense that the world has gone crazy. Well, it's going crazy, but it's not as bad as it seems on television and on the news. There are a lot of good people. I came back from the airport yesterday, and we had an Uber, and I got to talking to the driver. Well, he wanted to talk. He was talking about his family and so forth, and then all of a sudden he drifted into politics. And so I thought, well, he's interested in politics. So I started dropping a few words that might trigger a reaction. And boy, it opened him up. And I'm telling you, this guy was totally informed. He's a cab driver or an Uber driver. He's been doing this, he says, for 18 years. That's how he makes his living. And he understands everything that I just have been saying here in the last hour. I ran into a new friend of the family, just came into the family recently, a woman that comes from another country. And we got to talking over coffee and so forth. All of a sudden, she's talking about politics. She knows what's going on, not maybe in detail, but she understands what I just said about controlled opposition. And that's the hardest thing for people to understand because it runs contrary to their feelings. There's an old saying that it's much easier to fool someone than it is to convince them that they have been fooled. So she's been over that. She knows that she was fooled in her country. So the good news is that we already have the 15% that is necessary to turn this around. All we have to do now is reach out to each other, get organized, and create a counterforce of warriors who know what the tools of battle are. They're not guns and bombs. They're not even atomic bombs and energy weapons, although those are very formidable. But when you think about it, those weapons of mass destruction are primarily psychological weapons because they scare you so badly that you just say, oh, I won't do anything to get in the way of that because I don't want to trigger a war. And so you go along with what they're proposed, go along a little bit further because the possibility of being annihilated by an atomic bomb or energy weapon or something, or a pandemic, a new virus or something, you'll go along because of the fear factor. And now we're back to the fear factor we talked about earlier, which is why the Carnegie Endowment Fund for International Peace wanted to continue World War II, not end it too soon. So there you have it. I think I've talked enough, and if anybody's still listening, that's good to know.
Well, wow. I mean, we covered quite a bit, and I know we're wrapping up here. I don't know the next time I'd be able to have you on and such, but is there any other parting advice that you'd like to dispense to the audience, or books you recommend, or people you recommend following to learn more?
Yes, I will. And this may sound a little bit self-serving, but it's not. It's not intended that way. We've got to get organized. And so if anybody listening understands and resonates to the truth of what I'm saying, I'm sure it will not take you long to figure out, well, what can I do about it? And there is something you can do about it. That 15% needs to know each other. We need to get together. We need to get organized. And I'm very much involved in that right now. I've created an organization. It's not the typical organization, which is so easily infiltrated and becomes rotten and corrupt from the inside. Anyway, that's another topic. But we do have a plan that I think is realistic, where we can change things because of the power of numbers. We can make a difference still, even at this late date, by building, we call them campuses of Red Pill University. We've created an organization called Red Pill University based on the Red Pill meme that, take the red pill, man, and wake up, find out what the world is really like and get out of your illusions and so forth. So we have Red Pill University, and if you want to go to the website and look that up, start there, redpilluniversity.org. And then we put on some events a couple of times a year, and those are redpillexpo.org. And then the mothership behind all of that is freedomforceinternational.org. Those are good places to start. And of course, our bookstore, where we have some of the documentation, most of the documentation behind the things that I've been talking about. And that is realityzone.com. And as a matter of fact, I'd like to offer something free to anybody that wants to know more about this thing called collectivism versus individualism. I've written a little booklet on that. It'll be a major part of my next major book that I produce, but I wanted to get that part out first. So if you want a free copy of it, it's about 52 pages long. Just go online and type in Chasm, CHASM, because that's the name of the book, The Chasm, Collectivism versus Individualism. So type in chasm.realityzone.com, chasm.realityzone.com, and you can get a free copy, download it, print it out if you wish. If you have any questions you want to explore with me, I'd be glad to engage with a Q&A with you. Because that, first of all, we have to understand what we believe in. I mean, if we don't know what we believe in, we're suckers for what we are trying to prevent, because they will convince us that what they're doing is what we want. If we don't know what we want, It's easy to fall for that. So what we want is individualism. And I've given this my best shot as to why that is so. And most people have no trouble with that at all. So it's chasm.realityzone.com.
Ed, it's been an honor to have you on. I appreciate what you've done as far as alternative points of view, media, your works, your books, and not a lot of people want to first of all put themselves out there, and then secondly, produce works and be an advocate and such. So my hat is off to you for what you've done, and hope to have you on at some point in the near future.
Well, thanks for that. Just invite me, and I'll be back to scare some more people away.
Quick ask: over half of you who watch the show regularly haven't yet subscribed. If you've enjoyed the show, you're finding value in it, subscribing is really the best way to support the channel. It's, of course, free. It literally takes 2 seconds, and it lets the algorithm know that this content matters. And of course, my commitment to you is going to be that I'm going to continue to bring on great guests, refine those questions. And of course, I'm always receptive to your feedback. If there's certain people that you'd like to have on, or certain questions, or this, that, and the other that you'd like to have as part of the show going forward, things of that nature, please let me know. I'm pretty easy to access. Anyhow, that's my commitment to you. If you can subscribe, that would mean a lot. Thanks.